Well, if possible, we have to be careful about what company we keep. And we have to always bear in mind that there's a central direction and purpose to our life. Actually, because there's a purpose, there's a direction. And so all of us are suffering from avidya. We can put it another way, forgetfulness. We've forgotten our own true nature. Or in devotional language, we have forgotten the living presence of God here and now. So we have to take any means we possibly can to make sure that we realign our attention to the glory of the divine. We do this through various means. We do this through japa. We do this through imagination, image making. We do this by cultivating a penetrating vision, and it's quite correct. We have to see the reality underneath the superficial, which comes in layers of physical, emotional, mental, psychological, unconscious. All those layers are there, ego and so on. Ultimately, there is the full glory, but we don't often notice it. So we have to notice it by virtue of clues. And the clues come as expressions of the glory of the divine. The fact that somebody is alive and living is full evidence of an entity that is within and is the source and origin of that life. So that's where we start. Now, I'm not saying such a thing is easy. That's why we use the language of cultivating. We have to train ourselves to do that. And if possible, if there's an awkward person in our social context, we may have to avoid that person. If it's not possible to avoid that person, then we have to take extra measures to see the divine within that person. After all the great teachers were surrounded by people of different types, and they had to deal with different types. And all the incarnations, divine incarnations, they didn't come for themselves. They came for the benefit of those who were ignorant and therefore suffering. The result of ignorance is suffering. Now, there's a question that I received. So the question goes like this. It says, I have two questions to ask. And it says, Guru Maharaj, that means Sri Ramakrishna, has said to use a thorn, that is, he puts in brackets good qualities, to remove another thorn, bad qualities, and then throw them both, that is the thorns. Why does he want us to throw good qualities also? So I'm going to incorporate the answer to your question in this answer also. The questioner actually has got the text wrong and the context wrong. Context is the context of a transcendent being over and above good and evil. And that means knowledge and ignorance. We can phrase it like that. So what he's saying really is we should take a good thorn, a thorn of knowledge, which we cultivate, and we should remove a thorn of ignorance. Supposing you have a thorn in your foot, then we remove the one thing from the other. And just get the exact text. So the background to the text really is that Sri Ramakrishna would often explain to his devotees the true nature of God. He would say that God is beyond both knowledge and ignorance, and that only a person who can transcend both can realize God. He would say that even to know too many things comes under the domain of ignorance, and that pride of scholarship too comes under that category. I'm going to pause there and make a comment. So when we see somebody who is not assisting us in our directional life, in our spiritual life, toward our own freedom or a vision of God, then we have to try to avoid that person, no doubt. But if we cannot do so, then we have to cultivate knowledge. What is knowledge? It looks like a person. It looks like an individual entity. It looks like a person with behavioral characteristics. But that person, underneath it all, is suffering. When we ask or asked to be compassionate, in other words, to cultivate the supreme quality of love and compassion for everyone, what we're doing is we're asking to penetrate even the psychological layers, and we come to a point whereby even bad behavior is promoted by suffering. That means everybody is worthy of compassion. Compassion on the physical level, compassion on the emotional, psychological level. Everybody has psychologically a so-called original wound, something that they developed in childhood, something that is responsible for entrenching a much cherished ego. And so compassion should be our response really to everyone, on the basis that we have no right to judge anybody, because, as I always say, we all have flaws, and I also quip, I have flaws, but I have ceilings too. We have the good and the bad, we have the low and the high, all of that is within us. We're all on the same pathway, we're all struggling in our own way, we're all desperately trying to deal with suffering. And the way out, of course, is to do away with desires, that is, to do away with attachment to objects outside us, and also to do away with the thirst for such objects. And part and parcel of that is to get over a sense of a wish to be fulfilled and complete. The misunderstanding, the ignorance, the lack of knowledge, the avidya, as we call it, is that we have lost the sense of knowledge of who we are. If we go back to Genesis in terms of Christianity, they put it in this way, that our even-mindedness or our knowledge is lost when we pick from the fruit of the tree of good and evil. In other words, when we lose our pristine purity of who we are, the knowledge of our own pristine self. But then we have to go and have a penetrating vision further and see, Lord, you are there, deep within. Now, if that becomes very difficult, because we soon forget through social interactions this pristine knowledge of the self, then we have to take some extra measures. That means that if this is a particular difficulty, in other words, if the person or the situation is coming into our awareness to the extent that we think of this all the time, or much of the time, we have to take advantage of that obsession and introduce it into our meditation. In our meditation, we sit down, and the intrusive object we bring up and trace the origin of the person or the place back to the original origin, that fundamental ground wall being, which we call Atman, within, or God, or this divine self inside that person. Make a rehearsal of that. Make it dramatic. Use your full capacity of your creative imagination. Shower the person's image in your imagination with wonderful flowers of truth and beauty and goodness and love and harmony. You will definitely see how a person can change. Thought is the most powerful thing that we have. Thought determines the whole of our environment. Thought changes the world. If a group of people get together and think of a transformed world, which is characteristic of divine love, perfect peace and harmony, that is what the world will become. So why isn't the world like that? Because not many people are thinking in this way. We should be original thinkers and do it. You'll find a transformation in that person, but that doesn't mean to say we should be foolish in our dealing with people. Remember, Sri Ramakrishna had the example of the holy man who comes and he's warned by the villagers, there's a dangerous snake. If you go along this pathway, it's bound to attack you. And if you remember correctly, at the end of it, the snake gets converted, but misunderstands, becomes a foolish pacifist. And people take advantage of him. Or it, I don't know. And so his guru tells him, Foolish snake, I told you not to bite. Biting is a malicious thing. Have no maliciousness, have no viciousness, have no ill will towards any others. But I never told you not to hiss. And sometimes we have to reserve judgment in how to make sure that we are not taken advantage of and our equilibrium is not upset. But it is done with a level of discernment. There's nothing personal in it. I remember a story about some very big corporate chairperson. There was somebody on his board of directors, or somebody certainly high up, who really wasn't performing well. And so the chairperson called him into his office and said, I have a problem, maybe you can help me. I have a person who's always late, who never meets his deadlines and goals, and is very lazy and prefers to play golf than work. And what should I do with him? He said, oh, I would fire him. In that case, please pack your things. So we have to be level-headed. And the level-headedness comes from the certainty that the reality sits there behind, fully. It is God in fullness that sits behind everything, all free, all perfect, with no defects whatsoever. That we have to be convinced of, if we cannot avoid the situation or the person. The first thing is try to avoid the person. But if you're caught up in a situation where it's impossible, then these are the things you have to do. After all, we have to use our discernment, which says that we are looking for that reality behind and pervading everything that never changes. So he goes on, you see, according to Ramakrishna, the unwavering conviction that God alone is true and that he dwells in all beings is true knowledge, true jnana. And Ramakrishna would also speak of a higher idea of knowledge called vijnana. As a person following the path of jnana or knowledge negates all his experiences as not the truth and ultimately attains truth. That's what we call a jnani. Anyway, such a knower then comes down from the dizzy heights of knowledge, asserts every experience as manifestations of the highest truth, and such a person is called a vijnani. And then he would explain through this beautiful example how we can go beyond this knowledge and ignorance both. And then he gives this example of a thorn. But the thorn is not representing good qualities, it's representing knowledge. And the whole story goes like this. Supposing a thorn gets embedded in one's foot, then a second thorn is needed to take it out. And after that, both the thorns get thrown away. So you have to procure the thorn of knowledge and remove the thorn of ignorance, and then set aside both knowledge and ignorance. Since, of course, God in reality is beyond both. One is a means. Knowledge is a means. It's not the end. And the same thing with all the good qualities. Cultivating sattva, truth and goodness and beauty and harmony and compassion and love. All of this is cultivated in order to neutralize the negative effects of all the other things which are primarily egoistic. If you have a difficulty with a person, when you analyze it correctly, you may discover it is more about your own ego than about the other person. It is more about how you feel, not about what the other person is doing. It's more about your own reaction, not as much about the person who is seemingly against us. So this, we have to be honest enough to take stock of that and readjust our position. So coming back then to the question, that was the first part of his question. Then the second question, he says, there is a phase of life where we don't feel the worldly pursuits as temporary, and that has limited fulfillment. But at the same time, we don't have a great pull towards a spiritual pull. As a result, we may start easy things which are pleasurable. Can you advise us how? And he puts two parts. Firstly, to go through different tasks in our lives in the context of feeling less satisfied in them, but not yet fooled because of a certain personality type which he mentions. He's obviously been on the Enneagram. And then secondly, how to genuinely increase the pull toward God or search for God. So I'll answer the second part first. Contrary to rumor, or contrary to the lost and found columns in the newspapers, God is not lost and does not have to be found. What we call God is always there, always present, eternally present, never lost to us, ever. So why do we feel estranged? Well, we feel estranged only because our attention is pitched elsewhere. When we take our attention systematically and tune it into the glory of the divine all the time, noticing when the tuning goes out of sync and then tuning it back again. We do that when we drive a car. We don't hardly notice whether the car veers off to the one side or the other. We automatically make an adjustment. You might say the unconscious mind or the habit level knows how to make adjustments. But we start off slowly being aware of the small deviations. And if we don't take notice of that, then the big deviations become difficult for us. The Bhagavad Gita gives us a wonderful, wonderful profile of how we can get lost a little bit. And it starts off really with thinking. All our desires don't come from the outside. No doubt the triggers are there from the outside, but the desire is an internal thing. It comes up from inside. Our reaction is what starts the thing off. So we might look at something. We might use the eyes, and that acts as a trigger and creates a reaction. That's the normal sort of profile. The uncontrolled, untrained, normal profile. Something we hear, it triggers out something in us, we react. That's the normal psychological income-outcome. Input-output. If it's uncontrolled, if it's simply left. But if it's left, then we are no different from any other animal species. What is in between is the capacity for discrimination, for discernment. To be able to take in what is there, to judge it, to see whether it is important to us. In other words, whether it leads us in a purified way to the highest realization. And if it deviates our mind, then we say, thank you very much. This has no utility for me. Let me put something in which has much better utility. Something which is like a gear, which says, let me elevate this attention to the highest possible. Taking on, may noble thoughts come to me from all sides, is the prayer from the Vedas. So it begins, Jayatato Vishayan Pumshaha Sangasteshu Pajayati Sangat Sanjayati Kamaha Kamat Krodho Vijayati Krodat Bhavati Samoha Samohat Smrti Brahmaha Smrti Brahmsad Buddhinasat Pranashati. Brooding is the first thing. Thinking of something on sense objects, letting our attention dwell on these things. Sense objects can be people, can be events, can be things in the mind, can be things outside the senses. A person, having done that, develops attachment to these things. And then what happens from attachment? A desire comes up. And desires are never properly fulfilled. Desires are not properly fulfilled, and if we fulfill one desire, then another one will come up. And so if we feed the desire, we're feeding the fire, we're making it worse, we're increasing the attachment. So from attachment comes desire, and therefore desire is never fulfilled. Thought of desire leads to anger. From desire, anger arises. Anger meaning anywhere between mild frustration to outbursts. In any event, it's a state of dissatisfaction. I want, I haven't got. And I wish I had, but I haven't got. And then maybe justification for it. Life isn't fair for me, etc. And from anger, delusion. Delusion means we didn't put anything in the right perspective. We didn't value things correctly. And so for that reason, delusion comes from there, comes confused memory about what's life all about. What is the purpose of my life? And from this comes ruin of our discrimination, which is the essential faculty for sorting out what we should be doing, what we should not be doing, what we accept, what we reject, what we cultivate usefully, and what we leave aside. And if you lose your discrimination, then hope is gone as well, because your path that you're on becomes deviated, and it could be deviated to the point of going downwards, a regression. So what will we do? We'll involve a level of discipline. Now the Prishna Upanishad, let me make reference to that, because you see, if we're short of questions, the Prashna Upanishad gives us some 6 questions. From what is the origin of life is typical things that we ask. But all along, students are coming with these 6 questions, and the advice from the Pipalada, the teacher, wise teacher who's going to answer these questions is, please go away. And 3 things are mentioned. They're mentioned more than once, continuously. One is self-discipline, what we might call penance, strengthening the will, controlling the mind a little bit. And then the other thing is abstinence. Today is the start in the Christian tradition, Western Christian tradition anyway, of this penance and abstinence. In other words, not only, as I mentioned last night, are we fasting from food, but the idea of fasting means this self-control, abstaining from the urge to satisfy the senses, all the senses, whether it's food or whether it's wrong thinking, or whether it is gossip, or that is the controlling of what we hear. And on the other side of it, why don't we listen to good and beautiful music? I think you gave a wonderful statement from Romain Rolland in one of the groups, and Romain Rolland is comparing Swami Vivekananda's wonderful phrases, his speech. His speech is really Saraswati coming through him. He is really in contact, completely attuned and aligned to this beautiful walk, this wonderful source of wisdom that comes out, making the ego an open channel of divine grace to flow, and ideas flow, speech flows, all of this flows. After all, Saraswati really means that thing which flows, like the river Saraswati, a great thing that flows. And Beethoven also has this flow coming out as music, expressing for the first time, not just chamber music, dance music for the rich and so on and so forth, but this is how I feel. And I feel many things, but there's an honesty about this feeling And in his case, of course, it was a feeling of frustration that as a musician, he was increasingly becoming deaf, starting off with buzzing in the ears. By the time he gave his last symphony, his ninth symphony, he was completely deaf. And when he gave his first performance and received a standing ovation, he had to be turned around because he didn't know. He didn't even know that the concert was finished. And the strength of character to carry on and write the most remarkable music in the face of such pain, and yet such a spirit to overcome it. Also tuned in, therefore, to this divine spirit, coming through him as music, as musical notes that uplifts everybody. So the disciplined person, ragadvesha viyuktashtu, moving among all the objects, that means all the situations with people, situations with places and events, all of those kinds of things, situations which are seemingly outside us, all of these, I have to make a small adjustment here. All these situations we put under the category of objects. So moving among the objects, we don't avoid the objects. We don't avoid people, we don't avoid places, unless we actually have to. With the senses under control, in other words, your reaction under control, and free from attraction and aversion, you can attain tranquility. After all, that's what you want, isn't it? Tranquility. So that's how to do it. And in tranquility, all your sorrow is destroyed, all your upset is destroyed, your equilibrium is restored, because the intellect of the tranquil-minded soon becomes firmly established. We can say established in the divine self. We can summarize it in a phrase, be still and know that I am God. And contrary to that, there is no spiritual understanding for those who cannot control their reactions, the uncontrolled. And nor can we meditate if we don't have a controlled mind. Without meditation, there's no peace. Without peace, how can we have happiness? Goes the text. So this would be an answer. We have to continuously tune the mind in understanding that from time to time, our attention gets pitched elsewhere. Now we have to be convinced, because penance is the one thing mentioned for a student in the Prashna Upanishad. Avoiding, that is abstinence on the other side. In other words, controlling the senses. But one more component is put in, faith. We have to have absolute faith. Faith in what? Faith in the absolute principles of the truth. Faith in the truth of our own being. Faith in the philosophy which tells us not only is that being within us, but also is pervading everywhere, in, through, and as the universe of all objects. And so we make no distinction, actually, at the end of the day, between the objects and the one that is witnessing them. Two sides of the same coin, what we call Nitya, the eternal on the one side, and Lila on the other side. So I hope that shed some light on your question.
Yes, thank you, Swamiji.
Life is full of interesting things, interesting events. And as I say, of all the variety of beans, green beans, baked beans, etc., human beings are the most difficult. That's okay. We deal with it with a sense of humor. We take it as a drama. And in the drama, many varieties are required. So in this part of the world, and in the UK as well, at Christmas time, we have this curious drama called pantomime, where there are some obligatory players. You have to have a villain, at least one villain. There has to be the audience participation that hiss or boo or highlight certain obvious things. There has to be a joke or a comedian. There has to be a pantomime dame. There has to be a hero or heroine. There has to be a rescue involved in it. There has to be a chorus. There has to be singing. Many, many different colorful components are there. Bollywood is no stranger to it either. So all these are necessary components. We should not complain about it. We should take it as God's magnificent and colorful drama. And we should be thankful of the variety. We take it in that way. Well, I'm open for other questions too. If we are ever short of questions, I mentioned the Prashna Upanishad, which is dedicated to questions. And I think currently there's a series being told on it. I'm not sure how far we've got. I also gave a series sometime back. But the questions are questions that we all ask of a general nature. But in order to find the answers out, see what we are told. Stay where you are with me a year longer. In other words, stay sufficient amount of time to shuffle the creative ideas for oneself. And then maybe some of the answers will actually come to you. But in any event, if you're serious about your spiritual life, you should cultivate a sense of patience. You can't even expect an immediate result. So, practicing practicing what? I mentioned practicing tapasya. They're translated often as penance and then abstinence, two sides of the same coin. Things that we control the senses from going outward, toward, and things where we direct the senses toward the glory of the divine. And many examples are there. The fact that life itself is there is an indication that a life giver is there. The fact that the sun is shining means there's some entity shining behind that. The fact that there is matter and energy at all is on account of that. So these two things are there. Then, furthermore, faith. We have to have faith in what? Faith in ourselves. We ask Swami Vivekananda, faith, what does it mean? Faith in myself. Faith in God. If we see what Arjun's dilemma is in the Bhagavad Gita, it is he lost faith in himself. So Krishna does anything, does that which we would do for anyone in that same desperate situation. Restore a person's faith. Have faith in yourself. Not just have faith in your fundamental self. That's hugely important. The God within you. But have faith in your particular reason why that being that is within you wants to invest in you as a person. You have skills and abilities and talents that nobody else has. Recognize them honestly and use them. Don't put yourself down continuously. What a pity. I wish I was this. I wish I was that. What will people think of me here? What will people think of me there? How can I ever live up to somebody's expectations? All of this is an internal script, which is self-critical and intrinsically negative. If you were to make a list of all the positive things about yourself, some people find this very difficult, then you would see that there are many, many more positive values in you than there are negative values. Absolutely. It's just, in fact, some people who suffer from a lack of self-worth, I get them to write something, at least 3 things they like about themselves, and the next day another 3, and the next day another 3. After 1 week, you have so many items that you probably never thought that you had previously. Then you have to have faith in this being that digests your food, that lives with you all the time, that looks after you, remains awake while you sleep, that gives you a stream of itself for thinking, grace, that gives you an environment for growth, that gives you opportunities to elevate the mind, that gives you the opportunity for inserting joy against sorrow. Such a wonderful, loving, living being, you should have some gratitude for. You have to have faith in the Guru, have faith in the scripture. These are the different types of faith that one should have. All along, these three things are mentioned. So, the first question that gets asked is an obvious question, and it relates, what is the source of all these creatures here on earth? Never mind anywhere else, but here on earth at least. What is their origin? And so that is a question that is asked and answered in that particular text. But the main thing is these three qualities have to be cultivated nicely. Well, I am looking for other questions, but if there are no other questions, then we can conclude it for this evening. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace beyond all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji. Very helpful.